So I've recently been reflecting on my career so far in the coffee industry, and I feel like I want to share some observations so far. As a, I would say, early career professional and more so an early person in coffee, what have my experiences been like, and what are these larger observations that I've had of the industry? To be specific, this is the specialty coffee industry that I'll be talking about. Before I begin, I want to talk about my background and kind of how I've shaped a lot of these opinions and observations from. So I am early into my career. I've only been out of school for a few years, but because of COVID, my career path has been very, very weird. Originally, I was supposed to be in the financial industry, and then COVID happened, and now I'm in coffee. World works very interestingly. And I probably will make a whole video about how did I even end up in the coffee industry and what do I want to do with my time in coffee. My perspective is formed from someone who has never worked as a barista. I don't come from that being a barista, being a roaster. I started my career on the equipment side of the industry. So more so things like coffee startups. My first ever full-time job was at Fellow Products, and my current job is at XBloom. I currently run the whole coffee product experience of the coffee program at XBloom. So that is my perspective. That's the lens that I have viewed things from, as well as I've had some opportunities here and there to interact my online presence with the professional world of coffee. With that out of the way, I want to kind of cover 4 different topics that I think are quite interesting, and I want to see how these observations change over the following years. Do my opinions on these things change later on? Would be curious what you think, but the first one is size of coffee orgs. Second is coffee careers and growth. Third is there is a shit ton of ego. And 4, passion is the greatest filter. So let's start off with the first topic, coffee orgs and their sizes. I think what has been very fascinating to me is actually the size of coffee roasteries and companies. Everything is actually a lot smaller than I originally thought. For example, there are coffee roasters that have massive presence around the world, global presence. You can find their coffees in grocery stores, in hotels, they have cafes around the world, and they have a great online presence. You would expect orgs like this to have thousands and thousands of people running it. It's kind of hard to have that massive of a brand presence, I would think. And I really viewed this as a consumer lens, which is like, wow, I can find this coffee everywhere. This org must be like a conglomerate, a corporation, huge. But in reality, some of the biggest coffee roasters, specialty coffee roasters, roasters that you can find in groceries, hotels, airports, around the entire world, they're actually quite small. A lot of these orgs are under 1,000 people, and that's counting people who work retail and corporate, which is crazy. I think about local roasters, to me in the Bay Area, Verve, and roasters like Intelligentsia, where you can find their coffee everywhere. But they're actually quite small. And that's really fascinating to me when you consider tech startups or small startups in the Bay Area. Like, oh yeah, I work at a small tech startup. Oh yeah, how many people work there? 500 people, 1,000 people. And it's just so fascinating to see kind of the contrast between many of these different industries, and you compare it to coffee, and the big dogs, the old guys, the guys who've been around forever, you would expect them to be massive, but in reality, they aren't. That means that a lot of people who are working behind the scenes are actually seemingly wearing so many different hats. They're doing so many different things, or they're just incredibly talented, or they have a lot of passion, which we'll talk about later. But that's kind of a very interesting thing to me, is that, yeah, it's kind of hard to get coffee or a product everywhere in the world, and some of these teams, which are, in my opinion, quite small, have done it. And I think that's been the most interesting thing just about the scale, the size of some of these coffee companies that I wanted to share. The second point that I want to go over, this might seem a little negative, but it's just kind of an interesting observation, and people who have way more time in the industry may think I am crazy, or they'll agree with me, I have no idea, but this is my opinion of coffee careers. I feel like careers in coffee are insanely unstructured. And I think it might be due to the age of the industry. It's very young so far, and there really isn't a defined path in coffee. I'll use kind of my previous life as my potential life that I could have been in. It was like you could start as an analyst, then you become like a senior analyst, and you become maybe an associate, and you go on and so forth, and that would be your life. There is kind of a structure. Or if we look at some tech careers, right, you can do like level 1, 2, 3, 4, and that is kind of a very structured, defined path. It's like, yeah, you need to do these certain things to get to the next level. Or even in the case of education, in order for you to get these types of jobs, you need to maybe have a master's or a PhD. You need to do these types of things. In coffee, there isn't that, at least to my knowledge and my experience so far, is that unless you are at a large enough company, even in companies that make products, you probably don't have a very clear idea of what you have to do to get to the next level. The other thing that I've also heard a lot about is that while there are many opportunities in coffee, there are a lot of dead ends, especially on things like being a barista or being a roaster, is that there are so many dead ends in coffee. It's like you can climb, I guess, the small ladder of retail side, and then maybe you go into something like being a trainer, and then you find out you hate training, and then maybe you want to do wholesale, and there's like a lot of different areas in the industry that seem to just kind of be dead ends. Is like, okay, I get to this level, what is next? And there is often no next, especially in some of these verticals, which is really weird. When I talk to people who are in these different positions, it's quite interesting to see like what their thoughts on their futures are. Like, what do I do next? What is the promotion? What is the next thing I want to do? And oftentimes it feels like people get stuck, or they just hit a dead end, potentially really, really quick if they're a great employee and they want to climb the ladder. And once they reach the peak of that role, it seems to be very difficult to find what is next. This is something that I think is quite a turnoff for many people who could potentially want to work in the coffee industry, is that you can do one thing, but if you don't know what else is next. There aren't like very clear like silver bullet paths to get to the next level. Although you could say things like coffee certifications and maybe Q grading and all of that would be helpful in advancing your career path. It just doesn't seem that structured like other industries. Good or bad thing, I think it's interesting. Now let's talk about point number 3. There is a shit ton of ego. This was something that I did not expect. There is just so much ego. I think people who are a lot older, who've been in the industry for so long, totally understand this. They're like, wow, Brian, yeah, no shit, everybody has ego in coffee. It's very fascinating to see how closely people are tied to their companies, and I think this is what kind of fuels this ego thing. The industry is very young, so even at the older end of the spectrum, people have spent their entire lives, like their past 10 to 15 years of their lives, working on something, and they take a lot of things very personally. They are kind of the embodiment of their company. The main observation I've had is that people who are so closely tied to their personal brands or their companies, who have like big ego, they make so much commentary on what that guy is doing wrong, or what the other guy is doing wrong. And then you ask them, well, okay, tell me who that is, right? And so I will know. And nobody ever wants to name names. Everybody's so, like, they have so much ego, but then they're like, then so afraid of actually calling certain people out, even though they are calling people out, and I don't even know anymore. There is I would say, lack of self-awareness. It kind of feels like very bro culture-y in coffee at times. That is the type of thing that I have seen, is people take things so personally. People have so much ego about anything. You know, everybody has ego, right? But like some of the egos in coffee are so out there that it is just overwhelming. And honestly, very unexpected to see so much ego in coffee, and it's like just fascinating. Finally, what I want to finish off is passion is the greatest filter. And I think the interesting thing with this is due to kind of the supply chain and structure of the coffee industry, which is kind of not good when it comes to actually making money. Like, if you want to make a lot of money, I probably wouldn't work in coffee. And I think it's because the industry is not so lucrative. It creates a person that is incredibly passionate about their work. You have to be a certain type of person to be attracted to this coffee stuff. You have to be attracted to it because there isn't a lot of money. We're not gonna get into a conversation of why it is that way in this video, but we're gonna talk a bit about kind of my interactions with people so far in the industry. Why I feel this way is that because there isn't a lot of money here, you need to be someone who is driven, who is, I would say, very passionate about the industry, about coffee, honestly. You are doing it because you are genuinely passionate about coffee. You're not doing it because there's a ton of money, although there are ways to make coffee very lucrative. You're doing it because you genuinely love coffee. You have a passion for coffee. And this is something that I think is very unique. This is special. This is something that's so special about the industry and why I love working in coffee. I often relate this point here to my personal experiences in talking with people who are kind of in the same age as me, who have been out of school for a certain period of time, who are working and climbing the ladder, making a career. And I talk to people who work in my personal friends, a lot of them work in tech. We're in the Bay Area, right? So everybody's a software engineer, right? And I talk to them about, do you like the work that you do? Do you like the company you're at? Do you like the industry? And most of the time, the answer is no. And I think this is absolutely fascinating, is that in my conversations with people that I know, there is such a sense of escapism. There is like such a feeling of, I'm doing it because it pays a lot of money. I hate being here. I'm gonna stay here for a few years, make some money, and then leave. There is so much of that feeling of wanting to quit, wanting to leave, hating everything that they do. And these are the things that I do not find in coffee among young professionals. I feel that many young professionals in coffee, they are still enamored with it. They're still passionate about it. And I find this passion to still exist in professionals who have been in the industry for 10, 15, 20 years. And it's because passion for coffee is the filter. You're doing this because you genuinely love coffee, and I think this is something so unique about the coffee industry. We're probably going to dive into some other topics at a later date. I would love to tell you guys about what I want to do in the coffee industry. I kind of want to talk a bit about perception of value of coffees. Love to explore things like wages in coffee, why are things the way they are, and so on and so forth. But I kind of want to wait until I have more experience before I comment on some of those delicate topics like that. These are my opinions so far of just working in the industry, and I'm very happy to be here. I'm very honestly just enamored by coffee, and I'm enamored by the passion that people have for the coffee industry. So I hope that you guys enjoy this type of content. I think this is interesting for me to make, and I want to do more of it. So thank you so much for spending the time to watch this video. I'll see you guys around.